Here tonight, I heard on the radio that there are forest fires raging out in Hollywood and down in Florida, and they even closed the Rockport train line in Revere. There's a brush fire in Revere this afternoon. So we're pretty topical when we're here gathered to talk about this great forest fire of 1957. I'm going to introduce Tom Kehoe, who will be leading our panel, but before I do that, I wanted to say a special thanks to John Huss, who, as usual, worked tirelessly on this program, and he really is a gem. We're happy to have him at the Historical Society. So thank you, John. And I would also like to thank Ann Stabler, our hospitality chair, and our other board members who arrived with all of the goodies that you see outside. There are plenty of cookies left over, so on the way out, please take some home so you can watch the Red Sox game and eat the cookies. I also want to extend a welcome to several members of the Rockport Fire Department who, when they heard about this program, called and asked if they could attend, and we have at least 12 members, and they were kind enough to bring their truck that you saw outside, which was really a nice little... So let's begin our program, and I would like to welcome Tom Kehoe, who, along with John Huss, has worked so hard to bring this program to you tonight, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks.
Well, we have five very distinguished people here tonight joining me on the panel. And I'd like to ask all of them just to come in. I will introduce them before they speak. So, gentlemen. Well, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to start this evening other than to tell you that at the present moment, the fire alarm system in the building is being worked on. With that in mind, this is the absolute truth. With that in mind, that if someone were to come to the podium and ask you to please leave the building because there's an emergency, you need to do that. I said, how could this be happening on the night when we're talking about a fire that happened 50 years ago? Thank you, Kathy, and welcome everybody to the May speaker program for the Manchester Historical Society. Tonight's a night to bring together members of the Historical Society, the Seaside Firemen's Club, and the community as we look back on an event that thrust our quiet little town into the media spotlight for days in May of 1957. As one sits back this evening, you might wonder, how did they get the idea for this program? About 3 or 4 months ago, I was invited to go on a salvage tour of the present regional high school and middle school building. We were looking at the building to see what artifacts, what pieces of that building should be taken to the new building. When we went into the guidance office, one of the guidance secretaries said, "Oh, here's something you might be interested in." And it was a beautiful hand calligraphy certificate presented to the, quote, boys and girls, end quote, of Story High School, who fought the fire and who prepared food and served food to the firefighters. When I mentioned the certificate to John Huss, he was very interested that this program and this fire were 50 years apart. In other words, it happened 50 years ago. So John said to me, "Tom, why don't you come down to the Historical Society and we can have a little talk. Maybe we could come up with a program to recognize this." Well, I walked into the Historical Society one day at about 2 o'clock, and about 2:30 I left and I was the program organizer. That John is one heck of a convincing guy. 50 years ago, Manchester was a much different community than the community in which we live now. Housing developments like Hickory Hill, Rockwood Heights, and Woodhome were not even planned. Thousands of people had not discovered Singing Beach each weekend. There were many different and smaller shops and stores in the downtown area. And many of the homes on Smith's Point were only seasonal houses. One new housing development, done by Highwood Homes Incorporated on the Charlie Walker estate, was being built and developed. And some of the early residents of the Highwood Road and Walker Road area had a front row seat to a news story that was making the headlines in all of the local as well as the Boston newspapers. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not an understatement to say that May of 1957 was a time when the map and truly the history of the town of Manchester could have been changed forever. During tonight's program, we'll all go back 50 years to those days in May 1957 when more than 1,000, and I'm sure when you read newspaper articles and hear from these people, you're going to hear numbers of 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,400. When a big event like that happens, everybody wants to be part of it. But these 1,000 men and women, full-time firefighters, paid-on-call firefighters, and volunteers for Manchester, from neighboring towns, young men and women from Story High, local colleges, saved the town we call home from the Red Devil, a strong and unrelenting fire burning out of control between Route 127 and 128 on the west side of Pine Street. In this program, we'll take an eye and take a look back through the print media. We will also hear from some individuals who are on the battle lines as firefighters and townspeople work together over a few but very important days in our town's history. First, let's look back on the Manchester Fire Department's journals or daybooks for the spring of 1957. The spring was dry. In fact, Cape Ann and the entire state of Massachusetts were in the beginning stages of a drought. The woods throughout the state were considered tinder dry. These tinder dry conditions had people worried, as it had been less than 10 years since the October 1947 West Gloucester woods fire that had burned hundreds of acres of woodlands, as well as many seasonal and full-time residences in our neighboring city of Gloucester. The warm and dry conditions had produced brush and woods fires for the local smoke eaters to extinguish. In March 1957, the fire department responded to 5 wood and brush fire calls. In April 1957, they responded to 6 brush and woods fire calls. In the April 26, 1957 front page of the Cricket, the headline referring to the April 21st, 1957 woods fire stated, "Firefighters subdue worst woods fire in town's history. 75 acres burned near Highwood." That fire took 4 pieces of apparatus from Manchester, 1 from Beverly, 1 from Gloucester, and 1 from the State Forestry Department to extinguish. Little did the editor of the Cricket know that that headline would be so quickly trumped and just thrown into the recycling bin, trash barrel at that time, by a much larger fire. After the April 21st fire, the woods and brush got drier and drier. There was little action for the local forest firefighters until Saturday, May 4th, when the fire department received a call at 1:58 p.m. for a brush fire in the rear of the homes of Forester Road in the Highwood area. A second call on the whistle was made at 2:23 p.m. for more help, and then box 414 was sounded at 3 p.m. for more men and apparatus to the scene. State Forestry Department was called at 3:05 p.m. and they provided 2 county trucks, a county patrol truck, and a county forest fire warden and supervisor. At 3:20, the assembly call, 3333, was sounded to bring more manpower to the scene. In that early going, the local smoke eaters had more than 3/4 of a mile of hose in the woods, and they were fighting the fire from the Highwood Road as well as the Forester Road sides. An interesting fact was noted in the fire department daybooks. that the crews worked in the woods all night. In many forest fire and brush fire scenarios, crews do not work at night as they hang the hoses up in the smaller trees and have a skeleton crew stand by looking for flare-ups. Woods fires usually lay down at night. The term lay down means the flame length gets shorter and the spread of the fire is greatly reduced. This is caused by a cooling of the air temperature, a rising of the relative humidity, and a lessening of the wind speed. This laying down of the fire usually gets the firefighters out of the woods at night, meaning there's a smaller chance of injury, and it gives the firefighters an opportunity to rest. For the local firefighters, and for hundreds of people who came to assist our firefighters, there would be little rest until the following Friday, May 10th. On Sunday, May 5th and Monday, May 6th, the firefighters and volunteers are in the woods surrounding the fire, wetting down the edges, digging out and wetting down the hot spots in the burned over areas. Manchester and Gloucester continue to lay more hose to get water to the fire, as well as use a water department pump in the pond hole by the sawdust pile. This sawdust pile was in the woods to the rear of Walker Road and had been produced by a sawmill that was placed there to cut lumber. The crews did get out of the woods at 12:30 a.m. in the early morning of Tuesday, May 7th. A weather update would show you that the drought conditions were being made worse each day in the first week of May 1957. Temperatures were warmer than normal, and the winds were blowing at a minimum 15 to 25 miles per hour. On Tuesday, May 7th at 1:30 p.m., the Boston temperature was 75 degrees with winds from the west at 20 to 25 miles an hour and a relative humidity of 24%. For Wednesday, May 8th, the forecast was for temperatures in the mid-80s, westerly winds at least 15 to 25 miles an hour. A quote from the Boston Herald stated, "Today's hot, dry winds will parch and burn the grass on many lawns." During tonight's program, we'll have an opportunity to hear from the speakers on the stage. But I also want to hear from people in the audience who have memories of the fire, how it affected them, their families, or the town. After we have heard from the first two speakers on the stage, I'll open the two boom microphones at the bottom of each aisle. Please feel free to come to the front and share a memory with all of us. I'll now let the speakers from the stage tell you their experiences during the Great Forest Fire of 1957. Our first speaker this evening is Jerry Noonan. Jerry was employed as a caretaker on the Charles R. Kearney estate on Smith's Point at the time of the fire. Jerry left the point and headed towards the fire station on School Street. When he got there, Jerry worked as a dispatcher. He worked with the telephone operators stationed in the telephone building on Summer Street to get the out-of-town apparatus heading towards Manchester to assist our firefighters. Jerry?
Thank you for being here tonight. You hear me? Yeah. Really, I don't need it. I'm getting old. May 7, 57 was a day to remember. I was working on Smith's Point, fixing the swimming pool at the Kearney estate. When my father was the head gardener, I was just down in the back row. And I kept looking across the harbor and up to the north and west, and there it was, boiling away. I went home at noontime. I was just married the previous October. We were living on 17 Washington Street. I went to the fire station at 1 o'clock or thereabouts after lunch, and Ashton Hammond, the fire chief, said to me, "You were called fireman, we can use you." So I took over the control of the fire station at that point in time. And I stayed there from that Tuesday noontime till the following Friday night at 5 o'clock. What sleep I got came in the chair in the middle of the night. There were a lot of people in and out. We had apparatus there. We were very lucky. We only had one fire and one ambulance call during that period of time. The fire was at the embers from the forest fire came down to Dr. Winston's house at 29 Central Street, and that was the only thing that got downtown that caused the problem. Before joining the post office, where I was working at the time, and Tuesday was my day off, I was a call fireman, and that's how Ashton Hamlin said, well, I think we can use you right here. So there I stayed, as they say, right through. I remained there along that whole week. The telephone system at that time was manual with lady operators, and the exchange was on 52 Summer Street. The building's still there, the new telephone building was built in back of that, and they sold the front building. But there was an operator there, whenever I got on the telephone looking for somebody from somewhere, the operator was there to make the call. I had to do nothing but sit there and hang on the phone, waiting for an answer on the other end. My notes indicated I did those after the fire. I think it must have been 10 years after, when we must have had some sort of a program about it, where I said that there were over 1,000 men, 7 bulldozers, and 72 pieces of fire apparatus in town at the time. Some of the reserve apparatus was back at the town hall, some was in the station, and the parking lot next door. There are other people here tonight who can tell you more about the fire because they were actually in it, and I was actually in the fire station, and there I stayed on that Friday night and back on Sunday to start loading trucks again and cleaning up. So I'll turn it back to Tom, and the next person can take over. Thank you.
Joe O'Malley had just been appointed to the call firefighter force as of May 1st, 1957. When someone gets appointed to the fire department or gets appointed to the force, people get a little nervous when their first fire is a big one because they think they could kind of, have a little black cat around their back for the rest of their time that they're on the department. Joe certainly had a big one for one of his first fires. He worked as a dispatcher at the station and also was a pilot for out-of-town apparatus when they were sent to different sections of town to fight the fire. Remember, Jerry is calling these towns and cities and asking them to send apparatus to Manchester, Mass. I can just imagine some of the fire alarm operators in places like Winchester, Melrose, and the civil defense people in Cambridge having to draw a map of how to get to Manchester for some of his trucks. Joe spent much of his time with the crews of Lynn Engine 8 and Danvers Engine 3 as they worked to help defend our town. Joe.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm just going to give the audience here tonight a brief review of the woods fires between April 21st and May 10th, when the Great Forest Fire of 1957 was declared under control. I may be repeating some of the remarks that have been said here this evening, but I'd like to start off by saying that on April 21st, at approximately 3:02 p.m., the fire department was called to the area of Crooked Lane, where a woods fire had been spotted and had a great head start on the local fire crews responding. This was the first time I had ever witnessed the fire going from treetop to treetop, called a crown fire. 2 of our local call firefighters' lives were threatened, but they escaped. They escaped the danger. The immediate call was to Belleville State Forest Fire Department were called for immediate assistance. At 3:09 that day and at 3:15, additional calls were put out for manpower. All hydrants in the area were utilized, and a large, as Tom had said before, a large water hole in the bog area was found and used as a water supply. The crew fought the fire well into the early hours of April 22nd. On April 22nd, Chief Hammond and a crew of firefighters and high school students went back into the area, wetting down any extension and extinguishing hot spots. April 23rd was a continuation of checking for hot spots and any extension. In the meantime, small brush fires were breaking out in various sections of the town. April 24th to April 30th, the fire watch continued on fire patrols and was set up throughout the town. May 1st through May 3rd, the dry weather continued, and residents were anxious and worried as no relief was expected. May 4th, 1:58 p.m., received a call for a fire in the rear of the homes on Foster Road. All available apparatus responded from Manchester. At that time, the water pressure in the Foster Road area was very low. On that morning, the Manchester Water Department was out cleaning the water mains in the early hours. When the mechanism that goes through the pipe became stuck in the area of Central Street opposite Al's Cafe. Needless to say, it took some time before repairs were completed and the water pressure was back to an acceptable flow. That afternoon at 2:23 and 3 p.m., additional alarms were sounded for more help. Once again, Beverly Gloucester and the State Forestry people responded. At 3:20, the assembly call, as Tom had mentioned before, 333, was sounded for additional help. Many high school students and residents of, plus people from neighboring cities and towns arrived, offered their services, and were put to work immediately. May 5th, 9:30 in the morning, the fire was in the rear of Brooklyn School and Preston Place areas. Once again, a call for additional help was sounded. Crews worked the fire until 1 a.m. May 6th. May 6th was a continuation of working the fire in the same area around the clock. May 7th is the day I think no one will forget, the day that all hell broke loose. 11:05 a.m., call for more apparatus and manpower sounded. In the span of about 3 hours, more than 30 fire departments was called into Manchester to assist. That afternoon at 1 o'clock, 12:58 p.m., fire again approaching homes on Foster Road. Again, low water pressure in the area. All homes were saved. And again at 3:34, the fire department received a call for a fire in the home and office of Dr. Edward Winston on Central Street. Fire was started by flying embers from Woods Fire, quickly extinguished. Dr. Winston's residence was across the street from Al's Cafe. May 8th, 11:53, embers from the area of Walker Road and Highwood Road had jumped to the wooded area behind the Vielberg House at 52 Pleasant Street, now owned by retired Fire Chief Bruce McDonald and Marshall. 17 additional engine companies were called to assist, and at 12:47, once again, the fire had jumped behind the home of John Baker up on the hill to his parents' house. Both fires were quickly extinguished, and a watch for extension was set up. The Danvers and Swampscott engine companies did a great job in holding this fire right down. The cabana post was set up in front of the Regent Garage, a long torn down building which was located where the Gulf Station is today. The fire was threatening homes in the Pine Street area. Fire crews set up a defense and held the fire advance at bay. Many residents were seen wetting down their roofs with a garden hose. May 9th, the fire was contained, and some of the mutual aid companies were released. May 10th, in the evening, a sudden temperature drop and a heavy rainstorm arrived, and many tired people were able to breathe on a lot easier. At this time, I'd just like to mention a couple of side remarks. That a great job the Manchester Red Cross Disaster Unit did, feeding 3 meals a day to the workers, probably close to 1,000 meals a day. And the great job the telephone operators did working around the clock. And as Jody said, the telephone office and exchange was located next to the present cricket building on Summer Street. And I thank you.
I'd now like to give some people in the audience an opportunity to share a memory with all of us here. So if you have something that you would like to say, please feel free to step forward to either one of the microphones on the bottom. I've noticed that there is a place for you to sit in the front row, because similar to a church service, the front row is completely empty. while you're doing this, while you're deciding what you're going to say, I had some people who come up and talk to me, and one of these is Sergeant Alan Gilson of the police department. Alan talked about being an 8th grade student here in the Memorial School. He went to the fire station during the first weekend of the fire and was told he was too young to fight the fire. He went to school on Monday, things were fine. Tuesday, went to school and somehow slipped out. Didn't go to school on Wednesday or Thursday. It seems every time he went to the fire station at that time, he was old enough to go to the fire lines. Alan told me he went back to school on Friday morning. When he walked into the front door of the school, he was met by a friendly principal, Mr. Foster Ball, who asked where he had been. I think Foster knew because Alan had probably worked directly in front of his house. I don't see the lines at the microphones. We're ready for people. Mrs. Loring, come right down, Sally.
I don't know how many of you here remember the fire as vividly as I do. My husband and I and 2 children at that point lived at 81 Bridge Street, and the fire came in behind Forster Road and behind Bridge Street. And one occasion that I really didn't want to miss was the Women's Club annual meeting. It was being held at the Essex County Club. And this was pretty safe. I felt I had a wonderful older babysitter, Mrs. Urquhart, with the 2 kids. And I thought I'd go over to this luncheon meeting. And before we'd had dessert practically, I got a phone call saying, would I please come? They'd asked us to evacuate our house, and she was putting the children in the stroller. We had a dirt driveway at that point. It was a long dirt driveway. And I rushed home, and I thought, I can take the children, but there must be something else, a memento that I should take with me. And believe it or not, I put all the photographs I could find in the house, threw them into the baby carriage, and 2 glass birds. Don't ask me why glass birds. But I was very grateful that we had such a wonderfully efficient fire department at that point. Thank you.
Stephanie Nahata-Senecal talked to me down in Dunkin' Donuts one morning when I was having office hours. And she said that she had gone to Boston with her mother and her sisters to celebrate her birthday. She remembers coming back into town, getting off the train and seeing the cinders and the ashes falling down and the entire town smelling of smoke. I wonder if Principal Ball met her at the door the next day. Is Alice Conley here? Oh.
My name is Lee Herter, and we lived in town at the time of the fire. We were on Boardman Ave, up on one of the hills, and I remember watching those columns of black smoke coming up from behind Brookwood School and Highwood and Forster Road. And it was a very frightening feeling because every so often it would come flare up and get very dark, and you just didn't know whether it was going to come down toward the town or not. And I also remember that same Women's Club luncheon that Sally was at. I hadn't gone to it, but it was just when the fire had flared up at one of its worst moments, and somebody downtown sent me to that luncheon meeting to get a hold of Esther Herrick, who was Dr. Charles Herrick's wife, and Floss Needham. And they were the obvious people to come down and organize a canteen. And so I marched into the luncheon that Sally spoke of, in my shorts or whatever, and got those two folks, and they were real heroes of that week, as far as I'm concerned. They masterminded the canteen, which was at the Congregational Chapel. They organized people in shifts, not only those of us who were sort of young marrieds living in town and able to go down, and we cooked big hot meals. We made endless sandwiches and served them, and a lot of kids from the high school came and helped serve. And this went on for endlessly for 3-4 days, but all masterminded by Esther and by Floss, and they were wonderful.
In so many notes and a couple of phone calls that I have received from people, people stepped forward and said, you really need to make sure to recognize Mrs. Herrick and Mrs. Needham for what they did, because the number of meals that they served to people and the number of hours that they worked and the number of people that they organized is just spectacular. Diane?
Thank you. I'm Diane Coons DeMille, formerly of Walker Road, and at that time I had 4 children. My youngest was a baby who was born on the 3rd of April. And I also had 2 dogs, one of which I think was going to have puppies at that time. I had a traveling husband who was working for GE at the time, and he was down in Baltimore. He happened to catch shots in Baltimore of the fire, coming into Manchester. So he called me in a panic and said, whatever you do, if you have to leave the house, make sure you grab all the records. Now, we had a file thing down in the basement with, insurance records and all that kind of stuff. But, I wasn't even thinking at that time. I had so much on my mind. So what did I do? I grabbed all the 78 records.
This is Don Killam, firefighter and former chief of the Wenham Fire Department, and I believe just recently retired after 50 years in the Hamilton Department, which is getting ready.
I had spent probably most of my life hanging around the Wenham Fire Department, just waiting to join. And I was 19 years old, and at the time he was supposed to be 21 years old. And on May 7th, I walked into the fire station, and they were getting ready to send a piece of apparatus to Manchester, and they had 3 men. And she says, well, you might as well start now. So I did. My first fire was the Manchester Forest Fire. I was here until the 10th, 12 hours a day. And the interesting thing was that we went home that afternoon, probably about 6 o'clock in the evening. We hadn't been in town 20 minutes, and we ended up going to Topsfield for structure fire. So I spent 42 years with the Wenham Fire Department. I retired there in 1999. Decided, gee, I really wasn't ready to get through. So I went up the street and joined the Hamilton Fire Department. So on May 7th, I had 50 years in. I'm going to retire at the end of September. And it's really been a great ride, and it started right here.
Danny?
I'm Benny Frothingham. Holly and I lived at 100 Pine Street when the fire broke out, and I was working in Boston. On Tuesday, I think it was, Polly gave me a call and said, I think you better come home. And I said, why? And she said, well, I can see flames outside. So I grabbed Skip Shattuck, who was working nearby, and he lived at the just up the street in Highwood Road. And home we came and turned down Pine Street. No, they wouldn't let us turn down Pine Street. Went up School Street and said, we'll go down Pleasant. No, they wouldn't let us go down Pleasant Street. So we abandoned the car and ran home. And sure enough, the whole ridge in back of Pine Street was in flames. Well, Shattuck got so nervous that he decided he would send his wife Isabel to their parents' house. They lived on Masconomo Street at that time. And I asked why were you sending Isabel there? Oh, he said, when the fire overruns the town, she can be evacuated from Singing Beach by boat. But Skip and I worked in the woods for 3 days and ran across any number of fire companies laying hose from Forester Road, some of it 2/3 to 3/4 of a mile. And it was a scary time because it was hot and you put the fire out and the fire would come back up and you'd have to go in and beat it out again. But fortunately they stopped the fire on the ridge and none of the houses in our area got hurt. Thank you.
Charlie Franklin's making his way to the mic. I'm just going to tell you, I did get a note from Alice Conley, lives on Union Street opposite the Sovereign Bank. Alice wrote me a note that said, quote, "We girls helped in the Red Cross canteen across the street in the Congregational Chapel, making sandwiches, stew, etc. around the clock for the firemen. It was scary as rumors flew and no one knew what was happening. Tuesday, May 7th, was the day we had part of our house painted and the air was so full of cinders the house was gray afterwards rather than white. Alice also remembers a gentleman by the name of Jim Wyckoff who brought a case of gin to the terrace at 15 Union Street. When the guys finished eating in the chapel, they came across the street to us for other types of libation." Charlie?
Yes, I was with 102nd Field Artillery in Salem. They called us up that night. I don't remember what night it was, but we come to Manchester at early morning, and they give us these Indian fire pumps to go put the hot spots out up off of Walker Road at that time. I think we were there a day and a half, and did our part. Okay.
Well, you certainly did your part.
Thank you.
Well, I'll do another one while people are making the decision to come down. Foster Ball didn't have to get mad at me. He was my principal. I was in 3rd grade. I didn't leave to fight the fire. But I can remember being out on the playground and watching the smoke billowing up over. We weren't sure if the fire was on Pine Street or if the fire was in the middle of town, say on the Powder House Hill Reservation. But I can remember all the kids in school listening to the fire whistle blow and also seeing the smoke when we were up there. And also the smell of smoke was just thick in town. I can also remember walking with my mother, my father, and my sister Laurel from our home on Lincoln Street up across Pleasant Street and getting to the corner of Pleasant, Walker, and Pine, and seeing fire trucks from quite a big distance away. And those fire trucks were just sitting there happily pumping water, and the hoses were leading off into the woods up towards Crooked Lane or down towards Walker Road. And all of Pine Street, every 50 yards, 60 yards, there was a fire truck hitched up there pumping water into the woods to help the firefighters who were, in many cases, hundreds of yards in the woods using that water to work to put the fire out. Anyone else? Well, if you decide...
My name, can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Nick Winslow. I was working at Newburyport at the time, and my wife called me up and said, "You better get home, the town's on fire." So I rushed home, had the same problem that Benny had, couldn't get into the town, so I walked back to my house. And Alex Starley, a friend of ours, lived on the top of Foster Street Road, called up the fire department and said the fire was taking his house over. So Peter and I walked up Foster Street, Foster Road. When we got to about where the Shepleys lived, and all of a sudden the flame, about 10 trees up in flame, and knocked it over. The percussion from it. And we waited till the trees simmered down a little bit and went to the top of the mountain, top of the hill. And Dan Slade was up there with 2 other guys with a bucket brigade throwing water over his house. So we ended up spending most of the afternoon and most of the night in a bucket brigade.
You hear people talking about having a difficult time getting into town. Needless to say, this forest fire had become a spectator event, and it did create some problems. The state police, according to the newspapers, had 35 troopers with 17 cruisers, 6 motorcycles here in town, and they would not let people turn off of the Pine Street or the School Street exits of 128 to come into town. But then another quote in the Gloucester Times said that May 7th was a day when the red fire wagons seemed to outnumber the private cars. So at this point, I'm going to turn the podium over to Don Toll. Don was a student in his senior year at Story High School. Story at that time was located in the corner of Brook Street and Norwood Avenue. He was employed by Holman's Apothecary, and that employment prevented him from working the early weekend days of the fire. But once he had the chance, he went to work. Don was one of the many Story High boys and girls who worked to help save the town. Don?
Thank you, Don. I'm going to read excerpts from actually 2 sources. One is a letter that my mother wrote to her 2 sisters at the time, and it's going to cover some things from Tuesday, May 7th, which was the big day, and then Wednesday, May 8th, which was the second biggest day. Then I'm also going to tell some of my own personal experiences. The Dick referred to is my brother, older brother. Howard is my father, and at the time we were living at 29 Lincoln Street, although we had lived at the end of Friend Street just a few years before that. They finally told Dick that chicken pox or not, they needed him. It just went through our entire family. He still has many places on his face, but hope he ran into nobody to pass it on to. If you read in the news that Lieutenant Governor Murphy has the pox, you'll know where he got it. As they assigned Dick to his car to take him through the fire area, the town had begged for the National Guard, but he would not give in to order it out until he saw for himself. Dick said they drove around 3 roads, and that was all it took for the old Democrat to come through. He couldn't get the order out quickly enough. Imagine old dyed Republican Toll riding with the man who made his candidate such a trimmer. The guide began coming in by 11 p.m. Tremendous truckloads of them. And so just after 2 a.m., they brought the gang, Donnie was with it, that's me, out of the woods with orders to be back at 6:45 in the morning. He was pushed as are the rest. Now to get up to today, Wednesday. The winds are worse than ever, and they have been hard-pressed all day. At noon, a box over in Pleasant Street blew in, and they were woods going. They got that taken care of before it got out of control. Just about then, I was glad I didn't live on Friend Street anymore. Since dinner time, that would be at noontime, the fire has done one thing they have been fighting for to prevent, and that is jumping across Pine Street. It is now headed towards the Essex Woods. I'm not sure in retrospect that ever actually occurred. They have evacuated the people from Old Essex Road and Pleasant Street and are prepared to put them up at the Horticultural Hall. They have their loads of clothing in their cars and are going down past here, a long, steady stream. They now have 2,000 men in the town fighting this fire, about 80 fire trucks, the last I knew, and just now 3 large tank trucks have gone down, and the Malden fire truck is going to pump them full of water. The Navy has come in with more tank trucks to fill. Howard's boss sent him home, so he has gone down and will probably do what he did last evening, cat food and drink. Richard is being used, not alcoholic. Richard is being used to escort new fire companies to wherever they radio in that is getting worse. The Army has a plane and helicopter flying over as they can spot some of the spots of flying embers start. It is impossible for an outsider to get in town at the present moment. Sure hope this quiets down before dark. The smoke is so thick you and your house reeks, and little black specks and cinders are all over. Harry Slade should get out a super duper edition of the cricket. In terms of a little background, and Tom's already just mentioned a few of these things. At the time, I was working at Holman's Drug Store, which is where Cal's restaurant is now, and I was employed there as a carbonic engineer. The younger folks in the crowd, that was a soda jerk. So as Tom's already said, I was not able to work the fire on Saturday, May 4th, or Sunday, May 5th. On Monday, May 6th, we were released from high school and worked all day putting out small blazes and hot spots. My location was above the end of Walker Road, near what was called Four Corners, and close to the origin of the fire. We worked mainly along a dirt road extending from Walker Road to Four Corners, through 2 granite posts, and thence headed to the piggery in Beverly Farms. This area was basically in the center of the entire burn area. My account is of Tuesday, May 7th, which I feel is the biggest day of the week-long blitz, and the day we almost lost the town. I wrote the account of the first 4 days of the fire during the summer of '57. These are excerpts from my writings. It was about 11 a.m. on Tuesday, May 7th, that a foresight of what to come was seen. To begin with, the day had started hot, and temperatures were expected to reach near 90. I'm questioning Tom Keogh's 75-degree temperature reading in Boston. Secondly, and more important, was the wind. During the night, it had shifted from southeast. The first 3 days of the fire had been southeast, and it switched to the west-northwest. As the day developed, the wind became hot, strong, and very gusty. Gusts reached velocities of close to 30 to 35 miles an hour, and probably at some of the times of the fire burn over that. Humidity was very low at desert-like levels. Severe drought conditions were in play. Thus little needs to be said as to why the fire got going. All the ingredients were there. At just 11 a.m., the whistle blew 333, the assembly call. Kerry Crane and I rushed to the principal's office, where Mr. Drew, the principal, called the fire station. They asked for 10 more students to report immediately to the Four Corners area. Kerry and I got a ride up with Mrs. Cannon, also giving Bill Footsie Woods, Bill Foxy Hatcher, and Dave Cameron a lift. Upon getting there, we started pulling hose up to an area just below where we had worked the previous day. After this, Foxy, Kerry, and I went to where Joel Wilson, Jack Sargent, and Kenny Forward were wetting down just above the pond. This was in a slash pile which had burned on Saturday, day 1, but due to the wind on Tuesday, day 4th, had burned back until it reached an area not previously burned. We worked this area for a couple hours, putting out hot spots and pulling small blazes. Then around 1 p.m., the fun began. I was on the nozzle, Kerry behind me. Suddenly in front of us, the sky became almost black as dense, acrid smoke billowed overhead from the southwest. The crackling of flames could be heard within minutes as the fire roared at us borne on 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Kerry and I quickly moved our line up to the dirt road, and with Dave Burgess and Phil Parsons pulled our line up the road as far as the 2 posts. It was soon evident, however, that we wouldn't be able to hold our position. Live embers were falling everywhere around us, and due to very low water pressure, we were very close to a mile, actually, from the fire hydrant. We were only able to extinguish a few along the road. Then as the fire bore down on us, crowning in the pine spruce trees over our heads, we all retreated. It's still clear in my mind, Dave Burgess yelling, "Run for your lives, get up." We ran down the dirt road for over a quarter of a mile as the fire roared by, headed towards the upper end of the road, where an epic battle to hold the lines was being waged. This included a hand brigade from a fish pool set up by Duck Burgess and Martin Jorgensen, which is credited with helping to save the top half of Foster Road. Following our escape, we immediately began pulling our hose line from the newly burned area, only to discover that we had lost several lengths to the fire. We reestablished our line, got increased water pressure, secured more hose, a half-mile trip each way to get it, and began moving forward again. We began a process of extinguishing small places and hot spots as we pushed back up the road we had recently run down in full retreat. The area had been totally consumed by both ground fire and the crowning fire in tops of trees. This wetting down process continued until 8:30, at which time our lines were laid down for the night, and we began to occasionally check our lines for any outbreaks and maintain our position. Roberta Bennett and Mary Emsley, two fellow high school students, brought some much-deserved food, highlighted by bologna and cheese sandwiches and hot coffee. This was our first food since breakfast. We maintained our position until 2 a.m. Every hour or so, we would check our lines to make sure of no outbreaks. None occurred. It is still a deep memory I recollect of looking on twinkling masses of red embers as far as you can see in any direction. It was a beautiful sight and one of eeriness, reminding one of the dangers perhaps what was to come. It's now 2:30 a.m. on Wednesday. Oil train arrived in his Jeep and told us we were relieved until 6:45 a.m. He rode Carrie, Dave, and I out to the fire station. As we rode out of the woods, I saw a sight I'll never forget. National Guardsmen by the hundreds were arriving on Walker Road and setting up camp. Driving down Pine Street, people were everywhere, undoubtedly too unsettled to sleep, thinking of how this could happen to them in our nice, quiet community. But it had, and will always come.
Foster Ball, as I mentioned previously, was the principal here at the Manchester Memorial School at the time of the fire. As part of his job, I guess brand new part of his job, he was asked to keep certain students who lived in certain portions of town late each day. That was until the fire department could determine that their area of town was deemed to be safe from the advancing fire. Once Foster left the school, he moved even closer to the fire. Foster and his wife, Virginia, lived right on the corner of Highwood Road and Walker Road, now number 26 Highwood Road. Needless to say, Foster, his wife, and his young family had a front row seat to the firefighting action. Foster?
There's been a number of changes here in the last 50 years in the Walker Road area. I think the only 3 family homes are still owned by the original owners. There's only 2 other than Ginny and I. And one is the McAleers, and Roberta and his son Chris is here tonight. I'm not sure, and Alyssa Parker is the other one. And I'm not sure if Alyssa's here or not. But in any case, there have been many, many changes that we have seen. Highwood Road had only one home on it. That was Dick Morgan, my next door neighbor. And the Snow House on number 3, Highwood Road, was under construction at the time. The final homes on Walker Road in 57 was where the Bundys now live, and the home that the O'Connor family lived in for so many years across from them, on the left of the road. One of the fortunate things, and I'm not going to draw on this because it's been repeated so many times, would be the horror of living this for so long. A couple of weeks, being there and just not knowing if that thing is ever going to be put out for good, because it's been indicated by several people here. You'd think it was under control, and then the peat and vegetation under the ground that was still simmering there would all at once pop up. So it was a constant fear looking at those woods to see if there was fire. I can remember one night, and I always did this for that 2-week period, look out before I went to bed. There were no trees on Walker Road in those days. It was a big, big field, frankly, from Pine Street up to the last homes. All those trees you see now were not put in until years later. So you had a pretty good view of the hills where the fire originated. And one of the nights, I can remember seeing a fire up there, calling the fire department. Maybe it was Jerry, I don't know the answer. I explained that there was a blaze there that concerned me. They said that they had men in the area, that they were sure there was anything to be concerned about, but that they would check into it. And they were right, there wasn't anything to worry about. Fortunately, as was indicated earlier, they seem to subside at night. It's quiet. They keep men on guard and what have you, but as it was said, they put the hose in the trees and then wait. My next door, Dick Morgan, who we've been neighbors with for nearly 50 years, worked for Arthur D. Little at this time in Cambridge. And he was in Detroit on business for Arthur D. Little. And he got up in his hotel room and turned the TV set on, and lo and behold, there was this huge fire taking place in Manchester. And our neighbor, Bob Wolf, being featured, hosing down the roof. Most of us were doing it in those days, because the cinders and what have you were just going all over town. So Dick made a few quick telephone calls, one of them to the airline, and took the first available flight home to be with his family. I asked my two older children, one with Tom in the 3rd grade, my boy Steve, and a girl Becky in the 1st grade, 7 at the time. We also had a baby 9 months old at home with Jimmy. And asked what he remembered, and he said he remembered going for a night or two and staying with the Joe Highland family, so he'd be out of the fire zone. I'd forgotten that. That's been mentioned. So Wednesday morning we get up to get ready for school, and my son Steve looked on the entryway and there's a man laying there, covered with a blanket or something. And Ginny and I went out in the kitchen to prepare breakfast. We looked up on the banking behind our kitchen, and there were 8 or 10 men. My daughter Becky got up and looked out a bedroom window, and there were a whole mass of trucks and men, some of them sleeping on little loam piles and so forth, in our front yard. So we wondered what the devil's going on. Well, you now know, and you have one person speak to it. We went to bed on Tuesday night, May 7th, and they declared the state of emergency by the governor. And the 102nd Field Artillery of the 26th Yankee Division from Salem had been activated. And my large lot in that condo I was covered with men and trucks. We have 3 pictures that I took at the time showing some of those vehicles and men on property and so forth. It was an exciting time. Fortunately for me, I was only in the beginning stages. In those days, you did your lawn yourself. I had about 25,000 feet to put to grass. And fortunately, I'd only done a little bit that I had fenced in, and the pictures up there show it. And the rest of it was I'd just been working on. Now, a lot of it was getting the stones out and getting rid of them. And so anyway, I was very fortunate. It didn't bother anything. The trucks were there all over the place. And the following summer, I finally managed to get most of my lawn. Well, finally, as has been mentioned, the rains came finally, after 2 weeks or whatever. The rains came and the fire was put to rest. And the fear was gone, and we knew our relatively new home. We've only been in it 9 months. And most of the people in Walker Road have only been in their home for a year or so, at most. And so that was over, and the neighbors of Walker Road were relieved. Thank you.
He was a police and fire photographer for the local departments. While he was working the fire, and he also, when he wasn't doing reporting, he was also doing some dispatching at the Regent Garage, John was also feeding material to the Boston Herald for the stories that they produced. John?
It's going to be very difficult for me to tell a story that has been so interestingly told by participants here tonight.